What up, what it do, and welcome to the channel. I think we're about like 5 subs strong right now. Notice I now use the terms channel and subs because I am a YouTube mogul here to distribute information to the masses. Now, the fact that we have little to no viewers and subscribers but it's sick for you because the things that we're talking about, very few people are going to know and be using, which means you're gonna get more jacked, more strong, and better at CrossFit than like, I don't know, almost the entire fucking world. I am drinking my pre-workout, so the goal is to get this video shot before my face absolutely fucking melts off. So let's get into it. This upcoming training block in the jungles in Lamont in Chicago, we're going to be instituting a training protocol and a loading protocol to progress our lifts called the Conjugate 5-10-20 method. Now, you may be unfamiliar with the Conjugate 5-10-20 method, and that's because I made it up. But it is a combination of 2 long used and very effective and have a lot of research behind them training protocols, which is the Conjugates method and the Conjugate method, often used and popularized by Westside Barbell, very common in the powerlifting space and sometimes in the athletic performance realm, but not as applicable to that given recent research. And the 6-12-25 method of hypertrophy, the 5-10-20 is just a play on that. 1, because I like the lower rep number 5 to start, and 2, because 5-10-20 looks better in my OCD brain than 6-12-25 does. So we will be combining variations of those 2 loading and programming schemes to help improve our overall performance and physiology, regardless of what your training goals are. This can be effective. So I didn't write this up here, but the way that this is implemented is we start off with a lift. Let's use the example of a horizontal press because that's what we're going to be using it for, both horizontal pressing and hinging in our upcoming training block. So we go horizontal press and we'll keep it super simple and we'll go bench press. To start off, we will be building up to a 5 rep max of bench. 3 to 5 warm-up sets, get up to something really heavy in your bench press that day. After we get up to our 1x5 at, we'll call it RPE9, then we will progress into our 5-10-20s. So for something like bench, we would then see 3 to 4 rounds of 5 bench, because we're taking that top number that we worked up to our 5 rep max on, and we're going to do it at, we'll say, 90% of our top set. From there, we will take 10 to 20 seconds of rest, and we will complete 10 reps of a second movement targeting the same tissues as the first movement. So for this example, we will then do 10. It's got to be less loadable, right? So we're going to move into 10 dumbbell bench with a pause and a slow eccentric on the way down. So we'd look at something like a 3-2-3-2-X tempo on it. And then we're going to finish with 20 reps of, now we can target the same tissue or one of the tissues that is being used in 1 and in 2. So in our 5 rep right bench, we're using our pressing tissue. We're pressing through our pectorals and our triceps. In number 2, we are again targeting the pectorals and the triceps. And then 20, we could transition into something like dumbbell flies if we want to target the pecs more. Or in this example that we're using today, we're going to do 20 rolling 2 dumbbell skull crushers. We're looking to take 10 to 20 seconds between each movement and then call it 180 seconds before moving into our next round of the bench, dumbbell bench, and rolling skull crushers. So it starts out, this is just an implementation, not a why it works section of the video. And the implementation is we start out by building up to a max effort 5 of that variation of the movement that day. From there, we then roll into 5 at 90% of whatever we max that day, 10 of a less loadable movement, generally with a slower eccentric and potentially a pause in the stretch position. And then we finish with 20 of an even less loadable movement, targeting the same tissues where we're not looking to have any type of tempo to it. We're looking to roll through it relatively fast, a little bit faster contraction speed, and therefore generate a ton of fucking pump in the muscle. That's all about the pump. So we're looking at load, stretch and eccentric, pump that shit. Now, the way that we then progress this from 1 week to the next is we change the movements entirely. So this is far from a standard linear progression. As we move into the next week, you can either totally audible the movements, or what we'll be doing as a gym and how we'll be progressing them over a 6-week time frame is that we will keep the pattern of the movements the same. So on our bench day, we are always going to be horizontal pressing. We are then going to use slightly more loadable variations of the lift from week to week. So we're not actually going to do the bench until week 6 because our 5 rep is going to be our test out, our 5 rep max bench. So we'll start with less loadable variations like pause dumbbell bench press, followed by dumbbell bench press. We'll throw a pause bench press in there. Towards the end, we'll see a reverse banded bench press to increase the load. So we are only progressing this in the sense of loadability of exercise, and we are not progressing it as far as a volume, as an intensity, unless you consider the fact that the load is a greater intensity, although it's a more loadable movement, and we're not progressing as far as like reps in reserve or anything like that either. That is how we will progress this. Other ways to do it would be like an upper lower day. So you could, if there's just variability trying to be treated in this, a less direct and a less specific program, this could week number 2 go into a strict press, and we can vary those pressing angles so that we challenge different tissues through different ranges of motion. Now, why should you care about the Conjugate 5, 10, 20 method? Also, sipping more pre-workout. Right, why should you care about the Conjugate 5, 10, 20 method? Well, if your goals are one of the following: to look good, or to be strong, or to be good at CrossFit, you should care about this. And I would like to think that in some way, shape, or form, I just summarized everyone's goals of why they go to a gym. So if we want to look good, let's start with that one. Then what we're talking about is hypertrophy. Side note, if your goals of going to the gym each day are based around how many calories can you burn, then shoot me a DM so that we can reframe your goals, because that goal is never going to get you to the results you want as far as your fitness, your health, and your aesthetics go. Better yet, shoot my brother Adam Powell's a DM as our in-house nutrition coach. He can help reframe why that shouldn't be your goal, and why if your goals are to look good, then your goal in the gym should be primarily centered around hypertrophy. Now, if we're looking to use the 5, 10, 20 method, or why the Conjugate 5, 10, 20 method stimulates a ton of hypertrophy, the first thing we need to look at is fiber type. And it stimulates it through challenging different fiber types. Why you should care about it is that this method of the 5, 10, 20 is going to stimulate different fiber types. And so if we look at, this is the cross-sectional area of a muscle drawn by yours truly. So basically think, if you took my absolutely gigantic bicep and you chopped my arm right here, and you were looking from your angle straight at my bicep, that is what we see here. You have 3 different types of muscle fibers within your bicep and every muscle in your body. You have type 1 muscle fibers, which exhibit low levels of contraction but fatigue very slowly. Then you have, they're very small, right? See them? They're little circles. Then you have type 2A muscle fibers, which are larger than type 1 muscle fibers. They produce more force. They fall into the fast twitch category, and they fatigue more quickly than type 1, but they're kind of a blended between these two. So fatigue more quickly than type 1, but not as quickly as type 2X. And they exhibit more force than type 1, but not as much force as type 2X. And then you have type 2X muscle fibers, which are the largest in diameter, and they exhibit the most force. One of the reasons is because they're the largest in diameter, and they fatigue very quickly. So if we look at how do we make this whole circle bigger, because the idea of the bicep getting bigger means that this whole circle expands to something like this dotted line. That's the fatter bicep. I had to close the garage door because there's too much noise coming from outside, which means I had to move the board so the light's on it, but now we can continue. So if we're looking at making this entire circle bigger, i.e. making the muscle larger, then oftentimes we will hit sets or repetitions in the like 6 to 12 range in an effort to target the muscles and create hypertrophy, because generally we're looking to target the larger muscle fibers, therefore increasing their size, therefore increasing the total diameter or size of the muscle, circumference as well. But in an effort to make this even bigger, wouldn't we want to stimulate all of the different muscle fibers of the muscle, making them larger? Because if we make this 15% larger and we make this 15% larger, great, we have a bigger muscle. But if we're also targeting these smaller type 1 muscle fibers and stimulating them, then we get more total hypertrophy and more total muscle growth. Now, how do we do that? There are 3 pillars of hypertrophy that we need to be aware of, 3 primary ways in which we generate that growth. The first one and the most important one is mechanical tension. Simply put, this is how much force you are putting into a muscle. So more load creates more force. Now, if you've been lifting for any amount of time, total load is going to limit total number of repetitions, right? If you load a bar up to your 85 or 90% of your 1 rep max, which is great for mechanical tension, you are not going to be hitting sets of 10 to 15 to 20 reps. It's just not realistic. So what do? We hit 5 bench at 90% of our top set. Our top set is realistically a really heavy set for us. And so we are utilizing that set of 5 when we move through those rounds to stimulate both strength, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But we are using that to stimulate our type 2X muscle fibers and therefore eliciting growth through these fibers. From there, the second pillar of hypertrophy is muscle damage. Now, if we want to create damage to the muscle, which is in like actuality, little micro tears within the muscle that then heal and grow stronger. This is what most people think of when they think of hypertrophy and the primary way it happens. We can best do that through slower eccentrics, pauses in the stretch position, a somewhere moderate number of reps, and with a decent but not near maximal level of load, because we have to have that slower eccentric and that pause position, which is going to limit load as well to get into the moderate range. So how do we do this? Muscle damage we generate through that set of 10. Now we're stimulating our type 2X muscle fibers. We're starting to fall into the type 2A muscle fibers in a blended approach here. And because we have pre-fatigued the type 2X, they are going to provide less total assistance towards our type 2A muscle fiber adaptations. And then we close it out with metabolic stress. A more real term for what we would call metabolic stress is, in the words of the GOAT Arnold, it is the pump. Just absolutely blast those things until they feel like they're going to explode. That becomes our set of 20. We're pumping, we're not moving that slow, we're trying to really contract everything, and we are just absolutely flooding each and every fiber of the muscle with metabolites so that it grows bigger and more resilient than ever before. This is how the 5-10-20 method will help to stimulate hypertrophy or growth of Z muscles. Now, what if you want to be strong, dude? Because being strong is fucking dope. Then this is how you get strong, using the Conjugate 5-10-20 method. Number 1, hypertrophy, which we just talked about. Yo, the strongest people in the world, what do they all have in common? They're huge and they have big muscles. There is a direct scientific correlation between a muscle's cross-sectional area, is the term, basically that screenshot of it, and its ability to produce force. If you grow your muscles bigger, they are 100% more capable, not directly actually like 100%, but they are entirely more capable of producing more force. So getting bigger muscularly does in fact mean getting stronger. It's related to the Z-scores and the sarcomeres within the muscle and their ability to cross-bridge and create force. But that's nerdy science shit that you don't care about. So hypertrophy leads to strength. Number 2, variability leads to generalized strength. This is a point that is sometimes missed and sometimes misleading with the concept of progressive overload and relates more to a concept of progressive overstimulus. And let me explain it like this. So in my gyms, we will frequently follow very dedicated progressions. For example, in our current training block, we are on Mondays and on Thursdays for 8 weeks back squatting with the goal of improving the strength of our back squats. And as we get to our final session of that cycle, we will test a 1 rep max back squat, and everyone will PR their back squat because it's a glorious progression and it's a grind, but it will stimulate and it will create that adaptation. However, at some point, especially as we get into way lower rep ranges, we're talking heavy doubles and heavy triples, they are not as stimulative, or it could be argued they are not as stimulative from a strength perspective as some more moderate range strength sets, call it 5 reps, for example. And that is because at that load, sometimes really what we're doing is we're practicing our technique of the movement we're executing on. And in the world of CrossFit, we often think of like the snatch and the clean and the jerk, and our gymnastics as being the very technical movements, and like bench, back squat, front squat, deadlift as not being as technical. But rest assured, there is a high level of neural accuracy and execution required to lift a big weight, because the heavier the weight gets, the less you're able to vary within your execution without failing the lift. And so there is a technical accuracy required, which we tend to start to practice, especially later in a cycle, when our goals are specificity of a single lift and boosting our ability to do so, which is an awesome thing to focus on, usually through large portions of the year, right? Because we need to lift those primary lifts. But one cool thing about the conjugate method, popularized by Westside Barbell, is that it provides an approach of variability. So what we're going to do is we're going to work up to a maximal 5, right? This is not the 5, 10, 20 portion. This is that starting portion of building up to a max 5. And that movement is going to change every week. So what are the advantages of having that movement rotate from week to week? Number 1, neural or neuromuscular adaptations. Your brain's ability to create force within the muscles, right? That's how a muscle contracts. You get a neural input, it gets sent down the spinal column through the peripheral nerves to the muscle for contraction. That improves over time. So at first it's a coordination thing. Your ability to coordinate sequencing or motor unit synchronization is the official scientific term of what's happening, and your ability to sequence firing of the muscles in progressive sizes in order to generate force. As we get later into our training journey, it becomes more our neural ability to fire more motor units, right? Everyone is not able to fire 100% of the muscle fibers or the motor units, right? Which is a neuron connected to the different muscle fibers. You're not able to fire all of them at once to create force, but as you train and you train harder and you push heavier loads, you garner the ability to fire more of those, which makes you stronger without having to get bigger. On top of that, we are going to be challenging the movement patterns through different angles, different starting points, different loading. What that variability then provides is not only an opportunity to learn and to learn to harness power differently, which gives you more synchronization and more coordination of what you're trying to do, but it also helps to prevent injury. 5 rep maxing every week of the same movement has been shown to have a higher chance of injury than if you are deviating the movement slightly. It requires different firing sequences, and therefore you're going to be at different joint angles when you're producing your maximal amounts of force, which is going to allow you to continue that output from week to week without having that fall off from either a loss in neural drive or inability to create force and therefore lead to injury. And the last one, neural drive, we've touched on heavily. As you continue to challenge your strength in different ways, you are going to be more likely to be able to produce strength as a whole. If you think of something like, you've ever heard of like country strong or like farmer strength? Because people that like work on farms or do hard labor their whole life, they just tend to be like all around super physically strong. And it's not because they trained the exact motion of doing a hay bale like this forever. No, they've trained themselves through so many different ranges and pushed themselves physically at so many different things and in different movement patterns that they just develop that generalized strength that then can be applied to those more specified training cycles. The stronger in general the body is when you start training towards a max front squat or a max jerk or any of these things, the more power your muscles are capable of producing, the more force they are capable of producing, the more you are going to apply that into a specific lift, which is why this is a generalized strength progression, less than a specific strength progression. And now, maybe your goals are that of CrossFit. And I know a lot of times as people get further into the sports of CrossFit and they get obsessed with their CrossFit specific performance, they tend to frown upon or not make time for things that don't necessarily look like what they're going to be tested on in CrossFit. Tested meaning in like competitions and the open and so forth. And so sometimes that's where people then really miss the benchmark on this, because what we're doing in a progression like so is that we are, as we just mentioned, driving up your total and general strength, which gives you so much more ability to apply force to the specific demands of CrossFit. So something like we'll be using a pin bench press in this cycle. People are like, well, I don't get tested on bench that much in CrossFit, and there's definitely never gonna be a max pin bench press in any CrossFit competition ever. Sure, that's correct, but you're gonna be asked to press a fuck ton over the course of your CrossFit career. And so the stronger, generalized speaking, you are at pressing, the more you have the ability to perform at pressing related movements, even if they are not the exact same. And the second one, which is very much underlooked, is muscular endurance. Muscular endurance is a fucking giant separator at every single level of CrossFit performance. And so this is one of the best ways to improve your performance by improving your muscular endurance. So if we look at muscular endurance, we're looking at different fiber types and their resistance to fatigue. So, right, every fiber type, 1, 2, 3, has a fatigue profile, right? How quick it will fatigue if given the stress demands. If you put the stress demands on it, how quick that fiber type will in generally fatigue. And then how limited a rest can you have before that tissue is ready to go or ready to output force again? By training this and the fact that we synchronize the fatiguing of the fibers in an order, right? We push something heavy, we create mechanical tension. Therefore, we fatigue our type 2X fibers. After that, we're going to push something at a moderate load close to failure, therefore fatiguing our type 2A muscle fibers. And then from there, we're going to pump something and create all that metabolic stress at a light load, further fatiguing the same muscular tissue that we've hit in the first two. We are building up that tissue's ability to withstand multiple contractions within a shortened window. We're then breaking and we're doing that all over again. Although it looks more like bodybuilding, the generalized framework of what we've just discussed and the implementation looks like bodybuilding, it will have massive carryover to strength development, which will improve your CrossFit performance, and it will have massive carryover to the literal physiological muscular endurance, right? That physiological quality of the muscle itself, which is hugely going to carry over to your performance in CrossFit as well. If you look at something like handstand push-ups, especially strict handstand push-ups under fatigue, you are not going to be limited in those for almost anyone by your breathing. It's going to be the fatigue of your triceps and your shoulders in that pressing movement. And so something like this is going to massively improve your ability to handle volume repetitions of anything utilizing your pressing muscles as you start to get more tired and as you start to accrue more and more contractions within a workout. The one thing that I will say that you could choose to do, if you're like, yo, I just can't bench press because I care about CrossFit and we don't really bench in CrossFit. And so I really just want to use this as an opportunity to take my handstand push-ups to another dimension. Here's how you could do it. You ready? We're still gonna go conjugate, 5, 10, 20. And this is how I would set this up. It's not as fun. You don't get the variability in there, which is a huge advantage of it, but it could be productive. I'm going to start with 5 strict handstand push-ups. Cool. You can't, oh, what's that? You can't do 5 strict handstand push-ups? Then don't worry about your muscular endurance of handstand push-ups. You need to up your muscular strength because that is your limiting factor. You need to work strength work, not endurance work. Until you can do a set of, at a very, very bare minimum, 10, then you don't need to worry about endurance. You need to worry about your strength. But I would then pair that with 10 strict press. I'm gonna do those with a barbell, faux show. And again, I'm going to add a relatively controlled, slow eccentric. And for these, I am not going to pause on my, I could go either way. I see a pause on the collarbones or not a pause on the collarbones. You can transition that from week to week as you progress load in it. And then I'm going to finish with a pin strict press. Once I finish my full range strict press, I'm gonna have a set of pins set up. I'm gonna set it up right at my headline, that same angle and that same range of motion we would be pressing through strict handstand push-ups, and I'm going to hit my set of 20. Now, I may need to vary load between these two because just keeping this load and then doing this one and doing it for a set of 7 is not productive. If we're just doing that for a set of 7, we are not adequately stimulating our type 1 muscle fibers. Even though we've created pre-fatigue here and pre-fatigue here, the set is not long enough to incorporate all of those fibers because we are not going to be in as oxidative or as aerobic a state to produce the ATP for those firing contractions. And so we need to make sure we're hitting 20 because we are chasing physiological adaptations and not just completing the movement. So that could be a way to audible it if you want to align it more with the specificity of CrossFit. But to be honest, the more I ramble about this and think about this, something like this and making that progression more specific, this is something that happens later in the off season as we get closer to peaking time. Because as we move through any off season and get closer to competition, a meet, peaking, athletic activity, anything like that, that's where specificity happens. We start broad strength and we become more specific strength as we progress this, because that's how all training flows of the year should be periodized in the macro. Thank you for listening to me ramble.